Shortly after the announcement of his departure from PSG, Unai Emery spoke exclusively and extensively to Marti Perarnau, the author of Pep Confidential, and Pep Guardiola, The Evolution, on his time at the club. Emery most notably went into depth on his relationship with Neymar and the rest of the dressing room, key moments during their Champions League tie against Real Madrid, the hardships of the team, what PSG are lacking to win the Champions League, and his future. Get French Football News has translated the exceptional piece of work into English. On PSG's bench, you seemed to move around less, and seemed more moderate in your gestures and instructions with your players. Was this really the case, or was it just an impression? I controlled myself a bit more, it's true. My priority was to adapt myself to the team. Not too long ago, a journalist asked Garitano why he never wore suits during matches, to which he responded that he wanted to adapt to the club. Leganés is a small city outside of Madrid, and for him, wearing a suit was not an essential factor. In Paris, I had a similar experience. Upon my arrival, I had to adapt to PSG and conform to certain formalities so that I remained the same person, all whilst adding nuances with my relationship with the players' board, stadium and fans. I became a bit less expressive in order to adapt myself to PSG. During the week, you would fulfill your role as a coach, but during the match, you were dependent on what the players did. Whether it was from a stroke of genius, from the opposition, or from an error, how do you manage that feeling of being on the brink of something that may ruin the work you've done? I am able to manage this through my experience, and having lived that kind of sensation on multiple occasions. I remember playing the Europa League quarter-finals with Sevilla. Beat Athletic Club Bilbao at San Mamés, and everything was in our favor, until Bilbao managed to come back and bring the match to extra time at Sánchez-Pizjuán. At one point during the game, Suseda was one-on-one with our goalkeeper, and I could feel that this moment would determine the outcome of this knockout game. If they were to score, the tie would be over. And upon seeing the play, I kept on telling myself, normality, 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 because Suseda could just as well miss the opportunity as he could score it. I learned to go through those kinds of moments thanks to this normality. The times where things go your way and the times where things go your opponent's way. Suseda didn't score that opportunity. It is not easy to do so in certain, pressuring conditions. The same thing happens when it's up to my players to pull off a stroke of genius or to score an easy opportunity. It's normality. These kinds of things happen quite often. But when you're in a team like PSG who wins very often, you are used to winning, unused to every opportunity being slightly less important than in other teams, where these kinds of opportunities come less often. At PSG, it is more common that these kinds of opportunities come about, which is why I'm more calm. To come back to your first question, that is why I move around less. Because we win more often. In PSG, when a player manages a stroke of genius and scores, I feel a form of normality. It's normal that a player manages such a feat. I talked about this with Neymar. I always prepare set pieces extensively, and that has often worked in my favor. But when you have Neymar, sometimes there isn't much more that you need. Neymar becomes your strategy. Marcelo Bielsa explains this very well when he talks about talented players who can manage things more naturally than others. Bielsa believes that the others, who make up a majority, who don't have the same gift, must repeat the actions so that they recreate it on the pitch. As a coach, I had the habit of showing players what steps to follow, similar to controlling someone with a joystick. Except that when you come to PSG, you realize that the players are the ones who make the most effective decisions. One day, I told Neymar that, there are match situations we have worked before the game, but in your case, you imagine those situations by yourself. What makes coaching a bigger team better than coaching a more modest one? Not just in regards to the possibility of earning titles, but from a methodological standpoint. Let's start from this very basic principle: coaching is very, very, very difficult. From there, coaching excellent players is even more difficult. Why? Because being convincing is the most fundamental thing to coaching. The players have to believe in you. Whether they believe in you because you have won many trophies, because you are a great coach, because you are imposing, because everything you say ends up happening. Whatever the reason may be. But they have to believe in you. And in big teams, the players expect exactly that, for the coach to not to mess up. That's also what they expect in a more modest club, but they are also aware of the larger margin of error and that bad results can happen more often. That is not the case with a big team. You have to be right even on the finest of details: your work, your preparation, your principles, your way of speaking, when you decide to speak. Everything is a bit more difficult. Maybe, from an external perspective, you may think that you can work less, but it's the opposite. You have to speak up at the right time, which can help your team win. In a team like PSG, where winning is expected, that is what gives meaning to your actions and what you say. In smaller teams, the results can vary. Here, it's not the case. You almost always win, and that's what forces you to hit your target at the right moment. Every time. A squad filled with the likes of Neymar, Cavani or Mbappe has plenty of egos. First and foremost, you need to establish a normal relationship with the player on a personal level. Individually or in groups. A coach needs to have a relationship with his player, similar to that of a father and son. In that respect, no one enjoys having to reprimand a player because he has done something wrong, similarly to how a father does not like yelling at his son. But sometimes, it is important to do so, without it ruining your personal relationship with him. With your son, it's easier to reprimand because you'll remain his father no matter what, with the same love. But with a player, a relationship can be ruined and he can decide to leave the club. That is why it is important to weigh your words and how you say things, because it is a more sensitive topic. This can have irreversible consequences on your relationship with the player. In a smaller team, there is less risk because the whole group knows that you are in charge. In a bigger team, the responsibility is sometimes put on various people. One day, Jorge Valdano said, "At Barcelona, the leader is Messi. At Real Madrid, it's Florentino Perez. At Atletico, it's Diego Simeone. A player, a coach and a president. A different kind of leader every time. I know when I'm the main person responsible, and when I'm not." It's a process that a coach has to live with and internalize, and that he assimilates with time and experience. In every club, you have to know what your role is and what role you have vis-a-vis the rest of the group. I am of the opinion that PSG's leader is Neymar. Or that he is currently becoming it. Neymar came to PSG to be the leader, to go through this process to someday become the best in the world. It's a process that will require a bit more time in order to consolidate this position. At Manchester City, Pep is in charge. At PSG, Neymar has to be. I think that I managed the dressing room quite well. My greatest satisfaction was that the team didn't sink after losing against Barcelona or Real Madrid. A few weeks ago, for example, we had a horrible first half against Saint-Étienne, but after the break, with one player sent off, we reacted well and managed to equalize. One of my staff members told me, "Unai, today the players showed that they're with you." If that weren't the case, we would have lost. And he was right. If the team wanted to end me, that would have been the moment to do so. But the team was able to react. That was my main satisfaction, even if this will remain something personal which won't matter for much from an external point of view. Of course, I don't control everything. Both round of 16 eliminations showed that. It is difficult to control the necessary elements with a big team, and I still need to improve in that respect. A few months ago, a PSG player said to me, "Mister, this year you have changed." It was obvious. I couldn't be the same coach with and without Neymar. We went through a period of adaptation with the player. A process which is ongoing. It is not instinctive just yet, because we have to really get to know one another. Coaching Messi, Ronaldo or Neymar is not easy. They are the best in world, so that is a lot to take in. You have to adapt yourself to them. Look at Guardiola at City. He is lucky because he doesn't have a major figure like that to be faced with. There are big players who become one when it really matters. And when it comes to taking radical decisions, Pep took them. For example, by getting rid of Deco, Ronaldinho, or Ibrahimovic when the latter had issues with Messi. By doing this, he is avoiding serious problems. On the subject of your relationship with the players, you never alluded to the linguistic elements, i.e. the language barrier between you and your players. Luckily, the French I learned when I was younger helped me out a bit. Of course, I don't fully master it. One day, I heard Rafael Benitez say that he wasn't able to transmit everything he wanted to say in English, and that surprised me because he was fluent in English and that he had been living there for 15 years. But he was missing that small percentage which would have allowed him to connect perfectly with his players. My language proficiency in French was enough to explain myself and to be understood. Of course, one of the most important elements for a coach to succeed lies in his ability to communication and connect with his players on an emotional level. Furthermore, I tend to talk a lot in the dressing room, even if I brought down the intensity of talks to 60%. I was able to say what I wanted to in French thanks to the 2 years of French I had studied in Hondarabia when I was young. My talks with the team were done entirely in French, and I think that we understood each other and that the language wasn't a barrier for us. Playing every 3 days didn't make that process of perfecting a team any easier. We went from cycles of training sessions to prepare for matches, to cycles for successive matches. On the other hand, I believe that a week full of work seems a bit too much currently, but I'm doing my best to make the most of it because it allows you to progress from session to session. At the highest level, it's become rare. Now it's from match to match. At this level, it becomes more difficult to work specific match situations in training. You don't have time. It's best to prepare a small video with specific plays that you have in mind, and that the players, who are generally smart enough, get the idea in around 5 minutes. I've always prioritized this order of work: on the pitch training, video sessions, repeating the drills and putting it into practice during games. This order has been reduced to 2 steps: working on videos and then the game. The change in methodology also included set pieces. Yes, it does. Normally, I work set pieces for half an hour on Friday and half an hour on Saturday, but currently, this is limited to 5 to 10 minutes during the pre-game talk at the hotel, which automatically reduces the range of opportunities. You find yourself with a smaller amount of possibilities on set pieces, typically designed to surprise the opponent. Though sometimes, there are still surprises. I've always had 3 principles on set pieces: playing it quickly before the opponent organizes themselves, playing it short in order to displace the opponent and create spaces, or playing it directly according to certain ploys. I've always worked with these 3 principles. At the beginning of the season, Neymar arrived and we didn't have the chance to work on these plays, nor have the possibility of deciding our set-piece taker. During his first match against Toulouse at the Parc des Princes, we get corner. Neymar takes it quickly and Kurzawa scores. We hadn't worked that at all with him. Afterwards, I told Neymar, "My work is limited to your strokes of genius. Can you talk about your style of play? Being competitive means adapting yourself to the reality of your opponent. Sometimes, you win because you use the ball better, and sometimes you have to adapt and give in to the idea that you don't have it." That's why I'm so admiring of Guardiola and Simeone. Because they're competitive with opposing styles. Of course, when I arrived to PSG, I knew I was with a team that liked having possession, having the ball, and that looks to score. I came with an idea of continuity. Let me say this: PSG played well and won. Many people don't value that enough and believe that it is easy. But what happened to us? We lacked competitiveness in important moments. Why? Because this team is not confronted with enough moments of adversity in the league. Being competitive also means being faced with adversity. One has to suffer like Simeone's team to win. One has to suffer like Pep's team to win in England. My team had 2 basic principles: having possession and pressing. That was the basis. Having the ball, and winning it back as fast as possible. I should add a little nuance. I'm talking about having possession and not positioning, because there are moments where you can win a ball through positioning, and others where moving out of position can surprise the opponent. And like Guardiola says, if you have to win with a long ball from the goalkeeper towards the striker and that the forward scores with his ass, then so be it. We work like that as well. Let's talk about the defensive midfielder, an essential element to a team. Why has this position been a weak spot for PSG this season? You have tried playing with Mata, Lo Celso, Rabiot, Verratti, Lassana Diarra. It depends. I remember when I would analyze Real Madrid, I thought that Xabi Alonso suffered from not having to run track back and that he was the weak link. When I would analyze Barcelona and saw Busquets, I thought that Sergio suffered from the space left behind him. I thought the same with Thiago Motta. Other great defensive midfielders suffer from a lack of space behind them, and when they are required to track back. But when a team has the ball 70% of the time, that is more important than knowing if you'll struggle when tracking back. You are the one dominating the matches. That's why your defensive midfielder's output during moments where you don't have the ball is less important. Because those periods don't last as long. If I were to put a destroyer at defensive midfielder, there is a significant trade-off between what I can do during build-up play, rather than what I can do in defensive situations. Of course, Thiago Motta needs to better without the ball. But if you analyze Xabi Alonso or Sergio Busquets, the same could be said for them. They struggle during those periods, but they contribute so much more while on the ball. I don't think this position was a weakness for PSG. Motta is an incredible defensive midfielder. His injuries were the problem this year. Motta brought a lot to the team and his contribution on the ball was significant. He had difficult tracking back? Fine, but so do two other European champions Xabi and Busquets, who possess the same characteristics as Thiago. I don't think PSG's problem was the defensive midfielder. Let's talk about Rabiot. He's a central midfielder, who is more comfortable playing as a defensive midfielder rather than a creative one. Even if he remains more of box-to-box, rather than a defensive midfielder. When you want to play with a defensive, creative and box-to-box midfielders in fixed positions, Rabiot finds himself confronted to a problem. He has to run, and not play in a fixed position statically. And even less so with his back turned on the action. Rabiot doesn't really like playing as a defensive midfielder, he likes playing as a box-to-box, but I prefer him as a defensive midfielder. That's why after the elimination against Real Madrid, I told him he would play as a defensive midfielder. In that position, he can be faced with play and switch around with Verratti. He is more competitive in these conditions. With certain players, you can't impose a strict idea. You have to adapt yourself to their characteristics in order to win in individual and collective competitiveness. Lassana Diarra? He arrived in early January, after having played for 6 months in a low-level league, and he needed time to accustom himself to the high level. Pep told me something fundamental last year. To win the Champions League, Barca had to go through two crucial moments in their history. Bakero's goal against Kaiserslautern goal in 1991, which prevented Barcelona's Champions League elimination, which they would win a few months later, and Iniesta's goal against Chelsea. PSG are missing a goal like that. This goal could have maybe come about last year when we lost 6-1 to Barcelona. Maybe that was the moment to hit the ceiling and reach the next stage. Or this year, with Real Madrid, PSG is missing that match, that moment to build upon. Having a Bakero goal, even if the opposition were inferior or didn't deserve to win. But that bam moment, where you score your goal and change your destiny. To become a great team, everyone has to go through this. The only team who doesn't need it because they've lived enough experiences like this is Real Madrid. This year, we went through a moment where everything could shift. It was at the Bernabeu where Real struggled. We could see it. We even spoke before the match, Real has to struggle to lose. Our objective was to make them struggle and for them to not come out alive from that moment. Giving them a fatal hit at the time when they were in most difficulty. We had the opportunity to sow in the second half at 1-1. At that point in time, I was calm, because the victory seemed feasible. Yet, and we spoke about this before, you have to be careful about the beginning and end of the halves with Real, because that's when the time where they wake up. For the match, what we hoped wouldn't happen, did happen. At the end of the first half we conceded a penalty and they equalized. During the second half, we didn't take advantage of our best period. At the end of the match, they took advantage of that and doubled the scoreline. We weren't able to finish our chances when they were available, and we didn't suffer properly when we should have. If they score the goal for 2-1, you have to suffer until the end, hang in there, grasping, suffering, resisting and doing your best to make sure the score remains the same. Of course, the second leg was a whole story because Real came to our stadium in very favorable conditions. We needed the match to be crazy, but we didn't manage. Maybe because I started players who would help us control play, instead of accelerate the rhythm of the match. At that point, I didn't have control of the team. I put players to control those tense moments, but the match required something else. As early as the 15th minute, I told my assistant Carcedo that it wouldn't be enough. For that match against Real, we needed the same excitement as last year. We needed to break everything. And with that excitement, Real would get scared. We managed to get that feeling at times in the Bernabeu, but not for the second leg. The Champions League ties against Barcelona and Real Madrid. PSG needed 5, 6 or 8 more minutes. It's just that, those last minutes. To break the ceiling, to get past that barrier, to overcome that psychological obstacle, but the club is not ready for that. Why was Verratti sent off? Because of his emotional frustration. Because it is difficult to hold back in such frustrations. You have to learn to live with them, play with them, or overcome them. This probably wouldn't have happened with a Real or Barcelona player. Once we get past that stage, we will make a significant leap in quality. Having a goal from a Bakero or Iniesta. Why did I put on Pastore when 1-0 down in the second leg? Because Pastore is a liberated player, who can try to meg the opponent without worrying about losing the ball. He's a player with flashes, who could have helped change the dynamic of the game we were playing. PSG needs to experience this. By recruiting Neymar or Mbappe, we put pressure on ourselves because, from this point onwards, we became the team with money. Be that as it may, Real Madrid did the same thing over the last decade with Cristiano, Bale, Marcelo, Kroos, Modric, polished and confirmed players. And they have Zidane, the best coach possible for a club like Real. Maybe Zidane wouldn't be the best fit for other teams, but for Real he is the best, and he shows it. Can he improve? Of course he can, but he knows how to manage that group and keep the players happy. The players have said it themselves. Zidane is the best coach for them because he understands them, he is happy to be with them, and he knows that they can't let him down when it matters. Could they be better? Yes, because they aren't always consistent. But Zidane knows what his group needs, and does everything to make them comfortable. Being comfortable means letting go, and paying the price in the league, for example. But that allows you to have the right intensity in the Champions League. We had the chance to ruin their dynamic and disorganize them, but we didn't manage. Coaching Real Madrid, Barcelona or another big club is very complicated. Finding the right balance is an art. The balance between making sure your players are happy, all while being very demanding with them. That's why Zidane's job is so difficult. And that's why Guardiola and Simeone's work is so admirable. For me, they are the two best in the field.